How's Jerry and Bob doing today?
Great, Jerod. How are you?
Doing really well, extremely well.
Doing good.
Today, we are going to go through the offer to purchase for the state of Wisconsin, and we're pretty much going to go through it line for line, unless the two of you guys wanted to cover something different.
I kind of like that line by line thing.
I kind of like that line by line thing too. So what I'm going to do is have you gone through zip forms before? We'll make this really kind of personalized today.
I mean, I know I have, but as we don't do it enough. I don't do it enough, and Jerry is on for the same reason.
Okay.
So it's always good to go through them again.
Okay, excellent. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to jump into zip forms. I'm going to share my screen. One moment. Bob, are you up at the cabin?
I am actually. We came up last night, and we've just got a contractor doing some work. So.
Oh, awesome. All right, I'm in. So when we go through, this is zip form. So once you put in the password and username, this will pop you to the main page. I'm clicking on new. In this, we're doing a new purchase. So I'm going to click on that. Here, when you enter the name, you want to place in the address of the property. Sorry about that. I'm going to put this on vibrate. You want to put the address of the property and then your name. And the reason for that is there's multiple people in this Zoom account, in this zip form account. And that just lets everybody knows, this is Bob Hawkins. Don't go in there. That's his private information and stuff like that. So in this case, we'll do 1, 2, 3, ABC, ABD Street. And then I'll put Krenz. It's a residential transaction. So I'm going to click on residential. The templates, we already have templates created for you. So I'm going to grab the KW Select offer to purchase.
Now, Jerod, I don't know if we're not seeing anything on your screen.
Oh, you're not?
No.
Where it says
You might be sharing the wrong tab, Jerod. Just you might be sharing your home screen instead.
the 1 second, I'm going to go back to it because it pops up a separate window. So I'm just going to see if I grab the.
Perfect.
There
Are you
you go.
able to see it now?
Yeah.
You get the 1, 2, 3 ABD Street. All right. So when you're filling this out, click residential, active status, and then the templates. That's what I wanted to show. Right here are the templates. Someone must have created a personal template in there. But you want to go to the KW Select. This is an offer to purchase. So we're going to click on that. So that pulls up this information. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to jump to documents. And today, and here's all the documents that one could use in this process. Today, we're just going to go through the residential offer to purchase. All right. Has everyone seen KW Select Realty right here?
Yep.
WB11 residential offer to purchase. Line 1. Licensee is drafting this offer on. Plain and simple, this is the date you're drafting the offer. So place that date there. The licensee is agent to the buyer, agent to the seller / listing firm, agent to the buyer and seller. So in the state of Wisconsin, right out of the gate, you need to let the parties know who you're representing. And so in this case, if you're writing the offer and you're going to give it over to the listing agent, you got to let the agent know and also the seller know, are you representing this? Because you can represent the seller in the state of Wisconsin. You've never met them. You can represent both. You can represent both if you have the listing and the buyer, and both buyer and seller agree that you can represent both. But 9 times out of 10, you're going to be representing the buyer, the agent of the buyer. So what you're going to do is you're going to cross out this section right here. And that's all you need to do. Any questions with that? On line 3, it says the buyer, when filling that portion out, this is how they want to take legal representation of the property. So if they're going to put it in a trust, if they're going to put it in an LLC, this is where you would put it. Sometimes you can put their name and then put and or assigned. You can assign it to a different entity if you do that. But this is the name that's going to show up in the county records. Put the address of the property in the township or the city or the village, depending on what it is. And then you put the county on that row. This is where you put the purchase price, lines 9 and 10. On lines 11 through 16, this is one thing that's different from Minnesota and Wisconsin. If there's a refrigerator and you don't put it in lines 11 through 16, it's not included, even if it says it's included in the MLS. So appliances that aren't in there are not included in the purchase price, even if they're stated on the MLS. So we see that a lot. So you want to put everything there in that realm. The thirdly, items not included, line 19 through 23. These are things that maybe you don't want. A lot of times what I put in there is seller's personal property. And the reason for, when we go do a final walkthrough on the property and there's junk or garbage there, that's personal property. I can just say, hey, look at lines 19 through 23, no personal property can be there. Any questions with that section? Excellent. Seeing none, I'm moving on. Lines 24 through 36. These are items that are included: satellite dishes, antennas, water heaters, water softeners. Make sure that they are owned, not rented. Everyone that does business usually gets to buy a water softener once in their life on that realm. Sprinkler systems, components. These are items that are included. This also includes trees and shrubs. Here's a story. Had a buyer. We walked through the property. First, we were coming up on the entrance of the property. They had all these beautiful plants there 4 days ago. And when we wrote the offer and we went to do the final walkthrough, and all the plants were gone. And someone got to go ahead and pay for all those plants and shrubs because they are included in this grouping right here. So binding acceptance. Binding acceptance is when, and this is different from Minnesota, this is a date and time where you give the seller to respond to this offer. So let's say we were writing this offer today and I was delivering it at 2 o'clock. I could give the seller September 1st by 2 o'clock in the afternoon, 24 hours to respond to the offer. What happens if they do not respond? Let's say they respond at September 1st at 2:15. Does anyone know what happens if they accepted this offer at 2:15 and delivered it?
Actually, the purchase agreement expires as soon as that binding acceptance is passed, correct?
Correct. Absolutely. So they accepted nothing. It is not a legal document. Now, let's say it's September 1st and it's 3 o'clock past the time and they countered it. Offer is back online. You can counter an offer at any time, no matter what the binding acceptance was. You can bring it back to life with a counter. So that's how you don't need to rewrite the offer. The closing, this transaction to be closed on, this is where you just put the date of the closing. Earnest money. All right, line 56, earnest money. This is if earnest money is coming with the offer. We actually see line 56 very rarely filled out. Hardly ever. Because a lot of times people will deliver the earnest money like within 3 days of acceptance. So in lines 58 through 63, well, 62, here you would put earnest money. A lot of times we'll see 1% in the state of Wisconsin. If it's a negotiation, then a lot of times people will put more. They can put less as well, but a lot of times the standard is what we see is 1%. Delivered within, it's 5 days if you leave it blank. A lot of times what I see when reviewing documents is about 3 days.
Jared, is that business days or calendar days?
Those are calendar days. And that's an excellent question. Day one starts, so if we had an accepted offer today, day one is the next day. So it'd be September 1st.
And then you said calendar days, right?
Yep,
So Saturdays, Sundays count.
they do.
Okay.
Absolutely. Excellent question. Thank you. The earnest money, we as agents have no control of the earnest money. Actually, I like to tell people, especially clients on the list side, earnest money actually in the state of Wisconsin is somewhat a joke, because even if the buyer backs out and doesn't sell the property, we have to, or doesn't buy the property, we still have to ask them to donate the earnest money to us in a cancellation of mutual release on that. So interesting reading in here. Hopefully you never have to go through it. Time is of the essence. This just states all the dates and deadlines that we put in this offer need to be met. And that includes earnest money. Real estate condition report is made part of this offer. And on line 107, this is where you would put the real estate condition report, the date of it. And hopefully you're able to write the offer with the real estate condition report there. On lines 113 and below here, this whole next page, these are just the definitions that you would find on the real estate condition report. That's all what they are. All right, inspections and testings. So one of the things in the state of Wisconsin, you do need a licensed home inspector to do inspections on homes. So you can't just bring a contractor in and consider that good, because they're not a licensed home inspector. That is a little different if you call out like a furnace. Then you can go ahead and have a furnace guy come out, or a swimming pool, but you need to go ahead and state them specifically in here. So inspection contingency, if we were checking that, and then of that, we would go ahead here. I would just put of the premises, of the buildings. That's all you need to put there. And then on line 206, this says within 15 days, if left blank. That's a long time. Typically what we see when I review them is I see something around 7 days. So, and what that is, it is on, once we do the home inspection. So if we had an accepted offer today, day one would start tomorrow. We would have until September 7th to have the home inspection completed and to give any notice of defects or an agreement of an amendment. Does anyone know what happens at day 8? On day 8, there is no longer, it's no longer contingent upon inspection. So we've had, as long as we have a 7 here. So we've had it in the past where people went ahead, did a home inspection on the property, 7 days go by, day 8, they reach out to the seller and say, hey, if we have a problem with the roof, we need the roof to get fixed in order for us to move on. Say they have $10,000 of earnest money sitting there. The listing agent goes to the buyer's agent, home inspection, that passed. That should have been done by yesterday. Today's day 8. It's no longer contingent on the home inspection. Roof is just fine. See you at the closing. So that date is really important date. Another thing with that is you can either give notice to the seller. So let's say on that roof defect, we're going to give notice to the seller that the roof needs to be replaced. Give that off to the seller. That notice pretty much states you're either going to accept this and put on a new roof, or we're walking away. Actually, it's very rare that we see that. Most of the time we'll see an amendment.
So question, Jared, so off of the 7 days, it has to be agreed to, right, by both parties by the end of the 7th day for it to be good? And what if let's say they come back and it's early in the morning and you send it in and they don't respond, but it passes? How does that work?
So excellent, Jerry, I'm glad you asked that question. If you do a notice, it doesn't matter. Because in a notice down here on line 218, usually we wouldn't leave 7, we would have 5 days. If we gave them notice on the roof with that document, then what happens is they have 5 days to say, hey, we're either going to do a roof or we're not going to do a roof. If they say they're not going to do a roof, then this contract is null and void. And that's in the document. What most people try to do is they do an amendment to the offer and they work on getting it done within that 7-day period here. And so like on day 5, they'll write an amendment and they'll say, both buyer and seller agree to replace the roof with same like materials and good workman-like fashion. But with that amendment, you can put a timeline on it. So you make sure that the timeline is by that 7 days. Because if you give them an amendment and they do not respond, and they respond on day 8 and say, no, we're not going to do it, the home inspection contingency is still waived. So you got to make sure you get a decision by that deadline if you're doing it with an amendment. Which most people do because they don't want to kill the deal. A notice can kill the deal. Any questions with that? Excellent, seeing none. Line 227, radon test. If you're going to have a radon test, that's where you check. And here you're going to need more than 7 days. So you'd put like, this says 20. Again, I'd say like 14, 15 days on that realm. And then anything over the level of 4.0 PCI, you're getting a system. But if it's 3.9999999, you're not. Now just explain that to the client as well beforehand, depending on which side you're on. And again, here, seller shall have the right to cure or shall not have the right to cure on the radon. I've never seen a shall not have the right to cure with the radon, because usually it's putting in a system. So most of the time we see shall. You still have that same opportunity on the inspection, shall or shall not. But most of the time we see shall on both of those. The financial commitment. If you're contingent upon financing, you check that box right here. Then you have all these places to fill in the blank. Do you know who I recommend to fill in this portion of the document? This would work with me.
The lender?
The lender, call up the lender. I always called up the lender and had them go through it. The reason for that is, let's say something goes wrong with the financing and that end of it. You have a lot of power as the agent to say, hey, when we wrote this offer, I called you and we filled all this stuff in. This wasn't stuff I was making up. This was your terms, your agreement. You said that, we would go ahead, like right here, it states how many days before you have full loan commitment. 30 days before we have full loan commitment. If you get that from them, that's very powerful. Does anyone here actually know what first loan commitment, I'm trying to highlight this, actually means?
It's just in first position for financing in case there's any subordinate financing?
Yes, absolutely. Yes, absolutely. And what it does is the loan officer needs to provide a letter of commitment. So a commitment to the financing of this property.
So is that same as a written statement in like Minnesota then, basically?
It could be, Jerry. I've never wrote an offer in the state of Minnesota.
Okay, yep.
So I'm not quite sure on that. In this case, this is the time period that the lender has to get all their stuff together.
Got it.
And again, this is a timeline deal. This 30 days. You have 30 days as the buyer's agent to remove the financial contingency. Does that sound scary? Maybe I don't want to do it. A lot of people don't want to do it. Like, I want to keep that financial contingency going. Let's say you're going to close in 45 days and you have 30 days here. On day 31, if I'm the listing agent, I can release you from this document. No questions asked.
Can you leave that blank then? Is that an option to not make that commitment, or do you have to put a date in?
You know,
Or like a days?
that's a
Like
great.
in Minnesota, you can do, like, you can just leave it blank.
Yeah,
Commitment.
I wouldn't leave it blank, Jerry, because I think it's to your benefit as the buyer's agent. For the simple fact that I want my client to have a smooth transaction. And if I have a deadline to hold the lender, his feet to the fire or hers, I'm gonna do it. So this allows me on day 20 or day 25 to reach out and say, hey, where are we at with that full loan commitment? Oh, I'm still looking for a document. Oh, well, we need to get that document because I need to remove this financial contingency on the 30th. Well, in our case, it would be September 30th. On that realm, because you can get pushed out. Example of that, I have two examples. One is personally, I had a family estate. It was a beautiful cabin in St. Croix Falls on like 60 some acres. And the family decided they wanted to sell the property. Excellent. We listed the home. 2 weeks later, we had an accepted offer. It had a financial contingency of 30 days. About at day 20, the family members started to get together and like, we don't want to sell mom and dad's cabin. We want to keep it. We want to keep it as an heirloom. I'm like, okay. Well, let me reach out. I was representing them. Let me reach out to the buyers. I'm like, buyers, where are you at? Well, we sold our house. And that's going to close here in 2 weeks, and we're all ready to buy this property. We're going to actually make this our home. Okay, let the clientele, my clients, the sellers, know that. They're like, well, sounds like they want to buy the house. Let's just move forward. Day 35 comes. It's already 5 days past where we should have received the financial commitment to remove it, the letter from the lender and a notice removing it. Sellers go, no, we decided we want to keep it. I'm like, all right. I drafted a cancellation of mutual release and they signed it, and I sent it over to the buyers and said, hey, you guys never removed your financial contingency. Sellers now want to keep the property. We're pulling it off the market. They pulled it off the market. Those people were homeless. Sucked. It was a horrible situation. But that agent did not remove the financial contingency. And that happens a lot on the commercial end, on land. I've seen it happen on multi-million-dollar properties where they didn't remove it and they got another buyer, because sometimes buyers show up after you sell it and they'll pay more. And they didn't remove the financial contingency. So they bumped them and sold it to someone else for more money. So something you really want to be aware of is that. And how to remove the financial contingency is you need a letter, a letter from the lender saying that they're ready to move forward, a commitment letter, we call it. And then you also need a notice, which is signed by you just give notice that we're removing the financial contingency, and that's just signed by the buyer. And then that's delivered to the listing agent, and that removes it. Any questions with that?
Nope.
Excellent. Seller financing, if you ever run into that, talk to me. Just call, we're going, to a whole different level there. I've actually never seen it checked on that realm. So,
Jared, is that contract for deed or?
nope. No, the contract for deed, or what we call a land contract in the state of Wisconsin, we actually have forms to do that. They're proven forms right in zip forms that you can grab. And what happens is you put the general information on it, and then that gets handed over to an attorney
Gotcha.
on that. So if you're ever going to go down that route too, land contract, I've done them. But if you're ever going to go down that route, talk to me, because I'll help out with some of the verbiage on that. And then, we'll probably get an attorney involved right away on that whole thing. So, but seller financing, really all what this states is if you can't get the above financing, how it's stated, the seller will provide it. How it's written above. Interesting, huh? Appraisal contingency. I've been talking with people. A lot of banks are waiving these right now. So another reason to talk to your lender. So if you're doing appraisal contingency, check that. On line 312, you put how many days it's contingent for. I do the same as the loan commitment. Here on line 315, you seller shall or shall not have the right to cure. I give them the right to cure on it. Why not? If you wrote an offer for 500 and it appraised for 475, they can come down to that. And then we put 5 days. Now, when you do, let's say the property doesn't appraise, you do need to go ahead and send the appraisal over to the listing agent, to the seller, and then to go ahead and give notice that the property didn't appraise. A lot of times, just like in Minnesota, there'll be a negotiation on that front. Closing of buyer's property. So let's say you're writing an offer contingent upon a sale of another house. That's where you put that information. So you would mark that, and then you would put the address of the property there. On line 335, you would also mark that, and this is the bump clause. And 72 hours is the standard. It's actually what's written in the document. And what this means is that the seller can still have the property on the market. They can market it aggressively. And the only difference is that you'll see is, has anyone ever looked in the MLS and it says bump clause on it? Where it'll be like other bump clause?
Yep. Well, they have that, and then they say no bump clause as well, right?
Correct. Yep. Then there's a no bump clause too. But in this, thank you. In this scenario, if you see bump clause, you can still sell the property. You come in and you write the offer in a secondary position. So you would write the offer and then you would check line 348. If they had that verbiage, and then you wait to see if they can bump them, and then you get moved up to primary position because we can only have one person in primary. But when filling out the bump clause, 72 hours is the standard. And what's it stating is that if the seller receives another bona fide secondary offer, they're going to give you notice. They'll give you written notice saying that we received a secondary offer and we're invoking the bump clause. And you have 72 hours to do one of the items that are located on 338 to 344. And the easiest one is if you have an accepted offer on the property and you remove it. We have all the contingencies removed. We're going to close on the September 15th, and then we're going to close on your property. Boom, easy. You can also do like proof of a bridge loan. And also you have a letter from the lender. So if you have this mark right here, proof of a bridge loan, That's a nice way to do it as well. Or if you can get third-party financing on that, or other, if you have other means. And if the seller doesn't like the terms of the bump, they'll just change it in a counteroffer. Any questions with that? Seeing none. On the secondary offer, so let's say you write an offer on a property, and so you can't have two buyers in primary position. The one needs to be in secondary position, so you would just mark secondary offer. Just let your client know you're in a secondary position. And then this is really important here on line 352, buyer may not deliver notice to withdraw earlier than blank days if left blank. Well, 7 days if left blank. Here, you want to at least have 5 days. And what you're doing is you are locking your client into this property for 5 days or 7 days, whatever you put in there. What you're telling the seller is we'll stay here while you work on bumping that other person. Because if you put 2 days and it takes them 3 days to bump the person, then all of a sudden that seller has nothing. So that buyer is bound to this agreement for 5 days. So say the seller goes to the primary buyer, says, here's your notice. We're invoking the 72 hours. Clock starts when they receive the notice. 72 hours goes by, they're not able to do anything. They sign cancellation of mutual release. All of a sudden you receive a notice saying that you're placed in primary position. Now you're the #1 primary buyer. If 5 days go by and you are not placed in the primary buyer, you can withdraw the secondary offer at any time. It's also important to withdraw the secondary offer because let's say that a week goes by, you're off looking at other properties, you write an offer on that, and all of a sudden you get notice that you're in primary position. And all of a sudden your client has 2 properties. That's not good either. So there's a little work to do there. Any questions with that? Seeing none. Closing proration. So everything's prorated. The propane, there's a propane tank there, that's prorated. Electricity, all that good stuff. The most important thing here, they talk about real estate taxes. Okay. Now lines 366 through 377, these all talk about real estate taxes. Excuse me. The most important thing is line 366. You're going to mark that the most. So in the state of Wisconsin, our taxes are actually done in arrears. It's different than Minnesota. So in Wisconsin, we receive our tax bill typically the second week of December. And that tax bill is so for this year, 2022, we'll receive our tax bill the second week of December. That tax bill reflects everything in arrears. So it affects the year 2022. So a lot of times if we sell a house now, we don't know what 2022 taxes are going to be because we've just paid 2021. This states right here that we're just going to take 2021 taxes, divide it by 365, multiply it by the number of days that the seller has owned the property, and the seller is going to give that money to the buyer, and then they'll be responsible for the tax bill when it comes in the middle of December. That's the one that you're going to use 99% of the time. Line 369, we're going to do some math, which I have never seen checked ever for this case or scenario. Line 370, I have. Line 370 is special for the fact that if you're purchasing a new construction property, we're looking at taxes and arrears. Well, that could be the lot. So in 2021, let's say that most of that year, that property was a lot. But for 2022, there was actually a $600,000 house for it. So the taxes go from $700 a month to a year, $700 a month to $7,000 a year. Well, in that scenario, you wouldn't want to use the previous year taxes. You would want to use this. This is the mathematical formula where you take the sales price and then you multiply it using the mill rate. on that end. So new construction, that's widely used. It's also used a lot if we're subdividing land. Let's say the tax bill is on a house in 80 acres or 40 acres, and we're cutting out the house and we're doing 10 acres. Then we'll use this calculation as well. So really,
Jared, who does that calculation? Is that the title company or?
the title company can do it, and actually, Bob, you can do it as well. All you need to do is you go on to the tax records, and then you just go ahead and take the mill rate and the assess ratio, and you just multiply everything, and it just pops
Okay.
right up.
Gotcha.
But the title company will do it for you, whichever one you have marked on that. Line 377, you want to stay as far away from as possible. Line 377 says buyer and seller agree that they're going to get together once the tax bill is received in the second week of December and have a little discussion on how they should separate those funds. Do you think the seller wants to go back and have a conversation with the buyer and divvy up money for the tax bill?
Not only no, but heck no.
No. And they're going to ask you to go with them too. So then you got to tell your client to get their checkbook out. Nobody wants to do that. So I wish they would take that portion even out. So not to kill a dead horse, but 366, you're going to use a lot. And new construction scenarios, you'll see line 370. Any questions with any of that? Excellent. Conveyance of title. This right here is just saying that, and this is to protect the buyer, the property needs to be free and clear of all liens and encumbrances. And it states that right here. Another thing that you'll see is that gap endorsement coverage is on line 400. It just says that the seller will take care of that. That's going to cost about $175 on that realm. And seller typically pays for that. If it's a lease property, you would put that information here. More definitions to go ahead and read through. Property damage between, this is good with all the hail damage that's going on. Bob, I think actually you were dealing with some with one of your buyers or sellers here a month ago or something like that.
Yep.
In the state of Wisconsin, it's really well, it's stated really well. The property needs to be in the same condition as it was when you wrote the offer. So let's say that a hailstorm comes through. Well, seller, you need to go ahead and pay your deductible and put on a new roof because it needs to be on the same or better condition than when we wrote the offer. And that roof is obviously has hail damage on it, so you need to fix that. An example that I can give is had a property that we were closing in March, early March, and all of a sudden there's this huge wet spot up on the ceiling. They had an ice dam. Didn't tell me about it until the day before closing. I got a phone call and they're like, okay, Jerod, just want to let you know we had an ice dam, took care of the ice dam, that's gone. But we have a huge wet spot on the ceiling. So I went to Menards and I got 5 gallons of paint and ceiling paint. And I'm going to leave that for the buyer so they can take care of it. Nope. We had to have contractors come out and fix it professionally and get it in the same condition as it was before. So important there.
In Wisconsin, do you have to disclose that, Jared, between the time of contract and close?
Yes. Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, and that's an excellent question. I'll give you another scenario there. Went ahead, had a client selling their house in St. Croix Falls, Wisconsin, and it was an older house. And the buyer, I had the seller, buyer did a walkthrough of the property right before closing, and noticed that it was spring, everything was melting. Noticed that there was a little bit of water in the basement. So they go to closing and they're like, hey, not a big deal, but we saw there's water in the basement. We know all the snow is melting. Is that something that happens every year? And my seller said, no, we really haven't had any issues with that. And I grabbed, it's called the amendment to the real estate condition report. And what we did on that, had the seller, because we can't fill it out, seller wrote the day of the final walkthrough, water was leaking in the basement. Everybody signed it. Year and a half later, we get a notice from the county saying that we're all being sued for selling a house that has water in the basement. So we go to court, we presented the amendment to the real estate condition report stating that we had water in the basement, and everybody signed it. Judge, it was the fastest court hearing I've ever been to. Judge looked at it, said, buyer, you went ahead and signed this document, correct? Buyer said, yep, you knew there was water in the basement. Court, case adjourned, which was nice. If we didn't sign that amendment, I think my clients probably would have been writing a check. They'd probably find a way for me to write a check too. So, yep, definitely you want to disclose that. Buyer pre-closing walkthrough. So the buyer, and it's written here, has a couple times where they can come visit the house. One, on the inspections or testing, they can come check it out. The second time they can get to come see the house is 3 days before closing. So there's a window of 3 days before the closing where the buyer can come through and make sure that the property is in the condition that it was when they wrote the offer on that realm. Occupancy, plain and simple, day of the closing, seller gets a check, buyer gets the keys, move on in. Strongly suggest that you don't let people move in before that happens. Nothing but problems happen on that. Default, if the buyer defaults, well, the seller can sue. If the seller defaults, the buyer can sue. The hardly ever happens, but they do have that right. That just states they are entering into a contract. There is a sexual offender registry. This is also on the buyer agency contract for your client, that they can go to this website or call this phone number to see if there's any sexual offenders that are registered on that. Foreign investors, we have this just like state of Minnesota, no different there. Any additional terms that you want to put in here, this is your place to do that. This document is an excellent document. I strongly suggest after today that you just go through and just kind of read through it as well. It really answers a lot of questions that the buyer or seller would have in the transaction. But if you needed to write additional information, that's where to put it. This portion right here, so lines, I'm going to go through lines 552 to 572. Here, name of seller recipient, that is the listing agent. So you want to put the listing agent's name on 557 and their company. Name of buyer recipient, that's the buyer's agent and their company. This is not the seller and this is not the buyer. You want to put your name in there and the other party's name in there and firm on that. Fax, I don't know why they have it there. Commercial delivery, US mail. I've never seen any of these actually used. Well, lately. Can't say that in the fax. But you want to fill out lines 557, 558, and then also check line 568. And here, email address of the seller. This is the email address of the listing agent. Email address of the buyer. This is the buyer's agent. This is where you put their address. If you do not put anything on line 57, 58, 55, 69, or 570, you cannot have a binding contract. Because you need to be able to deliver the contract and they need to be able to have it in their hands. And without any specific delivery, there is no delivery. It just floats out there. You did not make it binding. This is the one area where I see probably the most opportunity for improvement, because a lot of times the agent writing the offer will put their email address for the buyer, but they'll leave the seller one blank. Well, you as a buyer agent has no way to bind this contract. or vice versa. If you put the seller's email address, listing email address, and not the buyer, someone can deliver you something and it's not binding. Another thing with this, with notices, and here's an example. A lot of people have teams out there, right? Or they have transaction coordinators helping them. And people will put let's say the seller's agent's email address there, but then they'll deliver all of the notices. Let's say you're going to remove the financial contingency and you deliver it to the transaction coordinator and not the email address that's on the offer to purchase. It's not, you didn't deliver it. Could be considered delivered on line 557 if you put the listing agent's name on there and you can prove that they've had it in their hand or saw it on that. But the true binding way to do it is the email. So even if you're working with a team or a group and they say, hey, send all the documents here, make sure you're still sending it to that email address that's on the offer to purchase list. It won't be binding. Questions? Excellent. Here, if you're going to attach any addendum, a lot of times what we'll go ahead and see is, sometimes they're already highlighted. The RECR is the real estate condition report. It's made a part of it. Addendum A and Addendum B. Addendum S, lead-based paint. Bill of sale. So let's say you have swing sets that aren't anchored into the ground or this or that, and you're doing a bill of sale because you're throwing in a pool table and all that other stuff. You can put that in there as well. They have covenants in here. A lot of times with the offer to purchase, I will put in, I'll make covenants part of it because I want the seller to see that we see the covenants. We know that they're there. You don't have to worry about us receiving them. Those type of things. Any questions with any of that? Any questions with the residential offer to purchase? Well, excellent. Well, seeing none, I'm going to give you guys 10 minutes back of your day.
Thanks, Jerod. Really appreciate this.
Yeah,
And-
thanks,
and like
Jerod.
you and I have talked before, it's just doing it and repeating and just getting better and more familiar with this form.
It's so different. It's so different than the state of Minnesota form. And it's just, we have all the concepts and we definitely know how to do transactions, but there's just a couple pieces in here that are very specific to protect you and your client. So thank you guys for taking the time to build your business and knowledge. It's greatly appreciated. Proud to be in business with you.
Thanks, Jared.
Thanks, Jerod.
Yep. Bye-bye.